Now, first of all, why do you have this stuff? What do you do with this stuff?
Well, this is how I make a living.
But, I mean,
I just wanted to be introduced as a composer and to start to point out how hard it was for women to be taken seriously as creators of music.
This is the story of women who hear music in their heads, of radical sounds. This is the story of dreams enabled by technology.
Using all of these, we can build up any sound we can possibly imagine.
In electronics, you're dealing in energy.
Technology is a tremendous liberator. It blows up power structures.
We shall not be robbed any longer.
You could make something with electronics and you can present music directly to your audience. Somehow women get forgotten from the history.
The history of women has been a story of silence, of breaking through the silence, with beautiful noise.
Okay, hello and welcome to Curzon Living Room, a season of live Q&A events on Curzon Home Cinema. Tonight's event is in partnership with The Wire magazine. My name is Emily Bick and I'm deputy editor at The Wire. And today I'm in conversation with some people behind the film Sisters with Transistors. So on tonight's panel, we have director Lisa Rovner, Laurie Spiegel, the pioneer in synthesizer and computer music composition, musician and broadcaster Hannah Peel, and Matthew Herbert, who among other things is creative director of the New Radiophonic Workshop. So if you're watching us live, we're taking all your questions and comments on YouTube and Twitter using the hashtag Sisters with Transistors, and we'll read out as many as we can. Okay, so I guess I'd like to start by talking with some of our panelists. First, if we could start with Lisa. Lisa, this is a brilliant film, and what gave you the idea to start talking to pioneers of electronic composition who are women? What made you start researching this film and making it?
Thank you. Hello, everybody. This is my first YouTube live moment, so it's a bit nerve-wracking. I guess the thing that really got my interest, I guess it was just an article about all of these women who had been kind of left out of history, and I was immediately drawn to the images, and then of course discovering that their sounds was really just exhilarating. It was music that I'd never really heard before. And then of course the political aspect of this story, the fact that these women had been or were enabled by this new technology. I studied political science, so that was kind of what really made me want to make this film.
Yeah. And what made you choose the particular pioneers that you chose?
So the archive really led the story and who I was able to talk about in the film. And of course, I really want to emphasize that this is not the complete list or the complete or comprehensive story of women in electronic music. This is a sampling, and this is the beginning of a bigger research, hopefully, that the film will kind of inspire. And what I hope is that the film inspires a new curiosity for stories that have not been told before.
Yeah. And one of the people that we have on tonight's panel is Laurie Spiegel, who has such a big part in the film with her composition, the Expanding Universe, and all of her work with Bell Labs in the film. And Laurie, one of the things you talk about in the film is a sense of freedom that working with electronics gave you as a composer and the ability to make your own worlds. Can you tell us a little bit about that and about how liberating you found technology? Laurie, are you here?
So sorry about that.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, how did that happen? Okay, sorry. Yeah, there are so many levels on which technology is freeing and liberating. The direct ability to work with the sounds rather than traditional composing where you're working with a set of symbols for the sounds, the ability to make like formless realities of the kind that we hear in our imaginations and the things that we feel that are much more difficult to express in series of notes on conventional instruments. I mean, there's this vague, amorphous world inside of our imaginations, inside of our minds that we didn't really have a way to express before and to find in common with each other. Politically, economically, socially, we're able to go directly to an audience to create something that people could hear, as opposed to being stuck, not being able to get through the bottlenecks of the record companies and the radio stations and the publishers and et cetera, which were very traditionally, you know, patriarchal sorts of organizations. Just liberating in many ways, in many levels, and freeing.
Yeah, and you also created your own tools so that other people could go out and compose with a music mouse and other tools that you've created.
In the early days, you kind of really had to create your own tools. There were modular analog synthesizers, which are essentially, the modules are really a tool set for creating your own instruments of your own design. But with computers, it's still, when I started using them, was at the level that there was no, you know, very little existing software for doing music. And you had to be a programmer. You just had to write your own. And once personal computers started coming out, I wanted to create, well, you know, a real-time interactive instrument, because I've always been an improviser, and I wanted to be able to share it with other people who, because previously, before personal computers, access to computers was extremely limited. All the tools in the early days that did exist were very expensive, and access was very limited. You had the large modular analog synthesizers that were very expensive on one hand, and computers, which existed pretty much only in large laboratories, government installations, things like that, prior to personal computers.
And you were lucky to work at Bell Labs at the time when it was based around pure research into sound.
Yeah.
And I think I was wondering, like, how much it really helps to have a sort of incubator space where you're allowed that kind of freedom with technology, and how helpful you think that sort of a space is.
It was great. Unfortunately, everything changed with the AT&T divestiture when they broke up the one regulated monopoly that had been able to sponsor that level of pure research. And a lot of people left and things became product oriented. Pure research is an endangered species that really, well, I guess there might be more of it now than there was during an extended period. But yeah, I was extremely lucky to be able to, I mean, Max Matthews basically took me seriously and gave me access to the tools that I needed.
Yeah. And this is something that we can take over to Matthew, working with the BBC Radiophonic Studio, because that was another place of pure experimentation that allowed the early pioneers, Daphne Oram and Delia Derbyshire, to start to experiment and become the composers that they became. So I wanted to ask about the state of the Radiophonic Workshop and its legacy. So Matthew, can you tell us a little bit about your involvement with that?
Yeah, sure. I think just as a sort of very brief bit of background, I mean, the original Radiophonic Workshop was set up in 1958, and Daphne Oram was instrumental in setting it up. And I think one of the really thrilling parts about the Radiophonic Workshop was the kind of experimentation that they were doing there. Very avant-garde, very cutting edge, thrilling types of research, was done on mainstream Saturday night kids TV. You know, when you look at Pierre Schaeffer in Paris, or you look at Stockhausen in Cologne, and you look at the other areas of Europe in particular, it was all academic and university led. But the brilliant thing about the Radiophonic Workshop was it was so mainstream. You know, you couldn't get more mainstream than Saturday night TV. And actually, it's one of the things not really talked about a great deal in terms of its legacy was actually it's the number one purchaser of its supplies. That's not quite the right way of putting it, but people that commissioned them the most was actually schools radio. And I went to school in Britain in the 70s, and we had wooden speakers on the wall with a little tweed sort of covering over it and one knob on it. And the noises made by Delia and Derbyshire and all the other interesting, brilliant people working at the Radiophonic Workshop came out of it. And I think that kind of that sort of domestication. I'm not very coherent tonight, which is appalling timing. But that kind of everyday use of the avant-garde was really sort of an amazing legacy. And it was slightly the victim of its own success in as much as technology democratized, became harder and harder for the BBC to justify the expense of the workshop when somebody could do it with a DX7 at home and send it in. And so it got wound down in the 90s. And then in 2012, in a meeting about something else, I got talking to somebody at the BBC and said, it was about a digital project. This would be a perfect time to relaunch it. And they said, okay, you run it. And so off we went. And, you know, I think it's interesting actually that the BBC, once we'd sort of got going, didn't really know what to do with this in the same way they didn't really know what to do back then with it. Like the music department, when it was first set up, were very against it. So it was the drama department that funded it more than the music side of things. And so since then it's been a little bit, the BBC still doesn't know quite where we fit, you know, and the sort of experimentation of it. And then very briefly, I just want to briefly mention the Oram Awards, which is when I first became director, I said, okay, well, you know, the first workshop was known for its pioneering women. And I was like, okay, well, we've got to have parity in the workshop. And between us, we sort of struggled to come up with more than a few names of people doing it. And that's a few women doing it. And that's not because they weren't doing it. It was because we didn't know about them and they weren't necessarily getting the support or the mentorship or the opportunities that some of the rest of us were. So I set up the Oram Awards, named after Daphne Oram, to help support and give voice to a whole variety of women, modern women experimenting in that tradition. And we've been thrilled to uncover all sorts of brilliant people as part of that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, one of the great things is that you do create all of this really experimental music, and you do it for films and you do it for television. And I think everybody who's on this panel and most of the composers who are in this film are all people who have made really brilliant work for either advertising, film, television, or just any kind of other accompaniment music, just to make these really strange and experimental and wonderful soundtracks. I'd like to talk to Hannah now, because I know that Hannah has done a lot of soundtrack work, as well as scores for dance performances and other things. So Hannah, what is your experience as a composer of creating new worlds for other people's visions and films and the like?
Yeah, well, I guess firstly I want to say hello to everyone, because this film I've watched 3 times already, and still I'm digging up more every time I watch it. And to sit on a panel with Laurie and Matthew and Lisa is wonderful. Laurie, I've played your music many a time on the radio, so the Expanding Universe is amazing. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
And there's that quote in the film, which you see in the trailer, Suzanne Ciani, like kind of saying, this is how you make your living. And,
yeah,
you know, the media aspect is the living side. It's the thing that pays for the expensive synthesizers and feeds the obsession of buying more and more. You know, I don't really see, there's no difference for me between writing for media or dance or theatre to writing my own music, apart from the collaboration aspect. It's always collaborative when you take it out of your own mind. But the way I use my tools and the way I compose is very much about exploring the mind and finding a way to express those feelings and nuances and things that are really hard to do with just classical instrumentation or acoustic instruments. And you know, in particular, I do like to kind of find a way to meld those worlds so they seem as one. They don't seem separate. That the electronic side is part of what we should recognize in every other day instruments or be part of the orchestra. I don't see that as any indifference at all. But there is a beauty to writing solely electronic music and exploring those worlds. And I guess the most recent album I put out is very much exploring the way that electronic music and synthesizers can work in that comparison, not like kind of a Wendy Carlos type of switched on bar kind of way, but in a way that uses them as kind of textural layers and scores kind of like horizontally rather than vertically.
We have our first question from the audience, and it's interesting that you mentioned Wendy Carlos because this is a question about her. This is to Lisa. Simone from London asks, I think the way you bring Wendy Carlos into the into the story is very elegant, using an archival interview in French, correcting her pronouns in the subtitles. Can you tell us a bit more about your choice here? Lisa, are you there?
Hey, I was just saying it was very difficult to find archive of Wendy, and when that came up, it was through a search that I did with the equivalent of the BBC in France. And I just loved kind of, the transition between Eliane's kind of otherworldly compositions down to this French presenter kind of talking about how this incredible moment in the history of music where this album was just as popular as the Beatles album. So yeah, the archive was really fun to work with. And then of course, in terms of the pronouns, it's 2021. So it makes sense to respect the Wendy as she is.
Okay. Okay, I don't think we have any more questions from the audience right now, do we? Oh wait, yes, we do. We just have another one in the chat. This is one from Jen from Peckham. She's asking a question for Laurie, and she says, I like how the film finds a link between Aramix and Music Mouse in making electronic composition accessible. I wonder if you were influenced by Aramix, or if you and Daphne Oram came to similar conclusions separately.
Separately, I didn't even know about Daphne Oram or her work or Aramix until the last few years. We were, not only not very well known to the world, but we often weren't known to each other in prior to quite recent times. But also Music Mouse is entirely different from Aramix. Aramix, the machine lets you actually write a score and create a score that is then realized. Music Mouse is an improvisational brainstorming tool for music that is entirely real-time interactive. Going along with my feeling that technology enables an awful lot more of the people who have always wanted to play music to be able to. Prior to modern technology, it really was a much more sort of elite, smaller group of people who could play music, and many people who loved music and wished they could play music, but didn't have the skills, the time, the ability to read notation, the coordination, all of the different things that made music a relatively elite, limited set of people music making, and especially composing, which required mastery of music notation. So I have wanted to make it possible and easier for far more people who love music to be able to make it. And that was a quite different orientation from Daphne's work, which is in itself totally fascinating, but you know, quite different from mine in some ways.
We have another question following up on that from Buzo via YouTube. And Buzo wants to know, is there a version of Music Mouse currently available?
Unfortunately, there isn't. I mean, I tried intermittently over the years to make newer versions, but Apple usually pulls the operating system out from under me and changes everything. It's a constant game of catch up. I mean, I have a semi-working version that I keep meaning to finish, but now, of course, we're going to whole new processors. There is an online emulation, partial emulation of Music Mouse at, I'll have to post the link later, which includes a lot of what it is, so people can try playing it in the web browser.
Oh, okay. I've got another question for Lisa, and this is from Jason from Manchester. Jason wants to know, were there any pioneers that you'd have liked to include but were unable to?
Yes. Like I was saying earlier, this is a very small sample of a bigger group of women. I was limited, like I said, from by the archive, but also by the lack of funding, the lack of my ability to speak other languages. One of the women that I was hoping to include is Else Marie Pad, who's Danish, but I was unable to find anyone Danish to help me translate. It was difficult to, so yes, there's so many women whose stories could have, but didn't make the final cut.
Okay. Lisa, I'd like to go back to something that Laurie was talking about, and that was about how a lot of the people who were featured in the film talk about feeling like they were one of the only people doing what they were doing and not really knowing about each other. But one of the great things about the way that you edit this film is that you have a whole generation of younger musicians who are all just talking about what great influences all of these composers and musicians were on them. There's almost like a whole community and support that's coming up, and you really showcase that through all of the voiceovers and interviews with people who are kind of a younger generation. And do you think that people do know more about each other now, and there is more of a community of composers and musicians that is coming together of women in electronic music?
Hannah, what do you think? I mean, you're more of the younger generation. Do you feel that you're more connected? I mean, I would assume with social media and things like that, we definitely know more about each other. But what do you think, Hannah?
Yeah, I would say without a doubt. I mean, the internet is the one reason why we have learnt about all, like, you know, I know about the names in your film. I know about certain pieces of music because people have put them on YouTube, and without that kind of intervention of the internet, they would still be, you know, hidden. So there's definitely a connection between a lot of artists at the moment sending things, and I'm in a really lovely position in that I get quite a lot of music sent to me for night tracks and Radio 3, so it means that I learn about a lot of different music and independent artists, finding them on Bandcamp and places, which has been amazing this last year in order to kind of find new music, and so many amazing artists are using sound and field recordings and manipulating those and working in that way. And so yeah, there is a community, and there is a real sense of like supporting each other and building each other up as well, and giving voice to stuff. And you know, your film just like kind of radiates that energy as well, which I think is really, really beautiful.
Can I just say to slightly contradict that, Hannah, I'm really sorry. Just one of the things that we found doing the Oram Awards was that we were asked a lot by winners or people that were shortlisted to be put in touch with each other or to build a sense of community. That I think there's still, just from anecdotally from speaking to those people, there is a sense that there's still a need for a sense of community around making. And I think this is particularly pertinent in this country around sort of geographical locations. You know, there's you know, it's something that we don't often talk about because we assume that the internet flattens everything. But often, you know, there's still amazing people in very strange, distant places that feel isolated and aren't able to sort of to have those ideas. This is why those early sort of laboratory and research centers were such sort of special times, really, I think, because of that community. So I think you're absolutely right, Hannah. The sort of visibility is really, really positive and really good, and there is a real sense of supporting and supporting each other. But I guess I just wanted to add that that's one of the things that we found ourselves doing more and more of, because it felt like there was a need to support. I think particularly, and this goes back to your point, Hannah, as well, about it's really hard to make money from making squiggly noises, you know, and you need to do other jobs around that. So, you know, often people don't have a lot of money, or they're just coming out of university and saddled with thousands of Tory debt. But I think that it's I think that there's still that sort of bit about how do I make this a full-time job and find the support network to do that, and how the research fits together and things.
That's common with the creative arts in general, that people usually have to subsidize it with some other kind of work, at least in this country where arts funding has kind of been politically trashed by the Republicans, shall we say.
Yeah. Okay, I have another question for Lisa now that changes the topic a little bit. This is from Holly McGrattan by YouTube. And Holly wants to know if you could talk about something you found surprising or shocking during researching the characters and their developments for the film.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, shocking is a bit of a strong word, but I guess it was surprising to see just the footage itself was just so mesmerizing, and just to see, you know, the contrast between the women and the kind of male presenters that are, you know, introducing them, or yeah, like the David Letterman and Suzanne Ciani, the presenter and Daphne Oram. There's just this contrast. But I mean, is it shocking or not really? I guess it's just more confirming what I always kind of felt and knew. But the thing that really surprised me was just how eloquent all of these composers were, just verbally able to express something that I'm not feeling right now. But just with words, able to express themselves. I was really surprised by that, the interviews, the richness, the depth in their ability to communicate with words.
Yeah. I have another question from YouTube for Laurie and Hannah. This is from Astrid, and Astrid wants to know, Astrid says, I'd like to know what instruments or synthesizers you've been using at the moment, or which ones you often return to, also, are there any films that you'd love to in parentheses, so score or rescore?
Wow, I've done soundtrack work on and off since the early 70s. My first steady job, all the way back in the early 70s, I got a gig for a small production company in New York doing all of their soundtracks for like, I think 3.5, 4 years in the early 70s. And I actually scored a feature in 76 that totally bombed, but it's been a long time coming, the recognition of women in our ability to score films. I also worked for a while as a music editor for film in the 70s, and it was all men composers. Absolutely. I mean, if you were a woman in the cutting room, your job was to get coffee and handle the rewinds. Up to a point. I mean, I was a serious editor for a while. Things have changed tremendously though now, Hannah. I mean, you're really working.
Yeah, I mean, I still think it's quite a struggle and a push to convince people that you can do the job. Like the amount of kind of interviews and things I've had over the last year and a half and that haven't come through. You know, sometimes I just think, is that because I'm too smiley and bubbly on the screen, or I'm too like, or is it, you know? But I guess the percentage of female composers in media is so low, especially for film. I mean, it's between 4 and 6% at the moment, and it's kind of gone down since the pandemic. So, you know, we're up against quite a lot of an age-old way of working in the industry. But, you know, the positives of it are that there are more kind of diverse scripts and more diverse programs being made. And then that means that there is more kind of female directors and more people kind of like looking to have people in their team that come from the same background. And I think that's really, really amazing to be able to kind of to be part of that movement forward. And but yeah, I mean, I always see the positivity in everything and try and shape everything rather than kind of like think, okay, this is how it's been, this is how we should move forward. And I think, you know, using the internet, having a voice, making sure, you know, we're recognized in the right ways helps the story, helps people get on board with your work. I'd love to know what synthesizer or system you use, Laurie.
Oh, it just varies. I mean, everything I do is different. I've been playing guitar a lot more lately, especially during the pandemic, and using my various toys from Eventide that I have a long relationship with to turn them into all kinds of strange sounds. Yeah, that and I've gone back to notation a lot. I mean, there was a very strong sense of mission for decades to try to establish the validity of technological tools for making music. People thought they were dehumanizing, that it was cold and, you know, a terrible thing to do to use electronics and computers to make music. That sense of mission sort of propelled me to keep going with the medium very strongly. But now that computer-based and electronic tools for music are totally ubiquitous, and it's stupid not to use them, as opposed to the other way around. I've been going back and, you know, writing notes on paper and beginning to re-explore conventional media and pick up, you know, other branches of my music that I started when I was young that I didn't pursue. Mm-hmm. So I'd say music notation is one of the main things I've been using in the past year or so. I know that's old-fashioned, but, you know, it works too.
Yeah, it does. I think there's something quite beautiful and kind of tactile about using it sometimes, and it feels like you can, I don't know, sometimes different programs you write differently using them, and it opens a new door, doesn't it, into your mind, and what you don't get stuck in something.
And with all of the technology and tools and progress we've had, there still is an incredible freedom that you have with a pencil that you still don't really quite have with anything else. Do you find that?
I am totally the slave to the computer. I only pick up a pen or a pencil to write lists. So, maybe Matthew, I don't know if do you use pencil? You have
yeah.
No, I don't. No, I don't. Also, the turnaround time is so quick on commercial jobs, film and TV work, that just it goes to orchestrators instead, and they do the heavy pencil work. But just on your point, Hannah, if it's any consolation on your film jobs, 2 or 3 in the last 6 months, 2 or 3 projects that I've gone for, they've said, "Oh no, we're looking for a women composer. We're looking for a female composer."
Really? Wow.
And, which is really exciting. It feels like that feels like a big change. And similarly for stories that have that are sort of non-white stories or what have you, they're looking for someone of color to do the composer of color to come on board. And so it feels things. I think people are aware of it, and it feels like something positive is in the air. I think it's it's worth noting as well, like the #1 film score for the last few years has been Mika Levy, Under the Skin, and that's referenced in every meeting that I go to on every single project, regardless of whether it's appropriate or not. It's an incredible score. So I'm not talking about that. I just mean it. People use it in every conceivable, and it's amazing in every conceivable circumstance, and it's amazing. It's really amazing that she's had such. She's got these men scrambling around trying to work out what it is that what she's doing.
Interesting. Yeah. Like diversity has become the latest in thing. I wonder how long that will last.
Yeah, it'd be nice to feel like there's some sort of more meaningful change on the horizon, and it's not just back to the old ways after a few months.
Yeah, that it's a genuine cultural change.
I think it will change things, because it's all about experience and it's all about opportunity. And if you have no opportunity, then you have no experience. And so it's hard to get a second job. But once you have the experience, then people hire you to do more work. So I hear what you're saying, Laurie, and I agree. And I feel that very much as a female filmmaker. It seems like it's like the hot thing right now. Everyone's talking about, all of these women. And I do wonder, is it going to last? But I just think the fact that we are able to get films out means that we will hopefully make more films, and so I believe it's creating positive change that will last.
Yeah, as usual, I was just too early. I mean, I was trying to, entertain the fantasy of building a career doing soundtracks back in the 70s, when you could go year after year after year and you never ever saw a woman's credit for soundtrack composition. And then, when it got to be the 80s, technology and computer programming were just way better options for making a living and having a main occupation. And I just kind of gave up on soundtracks for a while, although I still do them once in a while. Somebody comes to me. It's such, one step, 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing.
Okay. Oh, we have a couple more questions from the people viewing this at home. And I think we have a little bit of time. We can go a little bit longer just to get these questions in, if that's all right with everybody. I've got one from Lane Harris via YouTube, and this is to Laurie and Hannah. This can probably also be for Matthew. This is about analog electronic equipment. So Lane wants to know, there's been an uptick in interest in analog electronic equipment. How do you feel about that? Do you have very strong feelings about analog versus digital electronic music?
My favorite way of working has always been hybrid systems with both of them together. And in the early days of analog, we didn't have adequate means of editing. I mean, who had access to a multi-track recorder? You really just didn't. and it's like the ideal period for analog right now because it can be combined with digital in any number of kinds of hybrid systems. It's wonderful. The full potential of analog can finally be realized now. Hannah?
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think that's the beauty of it. I mean, it's like, and sometimes it's not just the analog that you want. Sometimes you need the analog, and then sometimes you feel that that doesn't suffice for certain things, or if you have to recall something quickly, but sometimes you want the beauty of experimentation, and I have a here that when you turn it on and it's not got a preset on, it just kind of sings its own tune, and it's just really beautiful. And that makes a great piece of music in itself. But yeah, I'm very much for both and that amalgamation between everything, for sure.
Yeah. Matthew, do you have thoughts on that, Matthew?
Well, I work slightly differently. I tend to work first from sound. So I do a lot of work with sampling. And so one of my records was made out of a pig, and working with an analog pig in the studio would it's trickier to get them to sort of squeal on cue. But that's something that I thought was interesting about the documentary. Actually, was so much of it was synthesizer led, actually. So many of the examples were around synthesis, and of course there's music concrete and radiophonic techniques in terms of feedback loops and tape and the sort of the analogs and of that. But I'm just thinking of what Pierre Schaeffer and sort of the route that he went and music concrete and the sort of context of that. And yeah, that was, I found that interesting. I didn't really know what conclusion to draw from that, but I felt there was a strong kind of or maybe a movement more towards working with synthesizers and the sort of the artificialness of that. And I was remembering something that Delia Derbyshire talked about, the sort of the roles of the radiophonic workshop. She talked about their commissions, or the majority of their work was trying to recreate sounds from the distant past, create sounds for the distant future, or something in the mind. And there's something interesting about this kind of external space, in a way that's away from the present. It's like it's dislocated from the immediate political circumstances around which it's made. And I don't know what my conclusion is, but there's that was interesting to me.
Okay, we have 2 more questions left. I know we're going a bit over time, but these are really good questions, so I hope this is okay for everyone. We have a question from Alex McLean via YouTube, and this one is to Laurie, but if anyone else wants to answer it, that would be great. But Alex wants to know, are there ideas from the early days of electronic and algorithmic music that you think have been forgotten or unexplored?
Oh, wow. I think algorithmic music we've only just scratched the surface, and particularly how to integrate the intuitive, subjective parts of ourselves as musical human beings with automated processes. I'm going to put it as having said that I try to automate the decisions that can be automated and reserve the ones that can't be automated to myself as a human being. And it's that balance between automation and the intuitive, spontaneous, human touch stuff that I think is going to be explored for a very long time.
And one of my really favorite things to think about is the piano, which is that piano that Beethoven had exactly an identical instrument to Thelonious Monk, but it sort of took it sort of took the human imagination a few hundred years to actually go, well, what about if we do this on exactly the same instrument? And so I often think that about the technology that we have now, that actually it will take us, probably takes a couple of hundred years to figure out to do what would, you know, that's the trick, I guess, as composers or people making things, is that's the thing you're always trying to trick. You're trying to trick your imagination to try and think, what would Thelonious Monk do with this material if he had 200 years? You're trying to sort of leapfrog that thing, you know, that chasm.
We have this problem, though, of how rapidly technology is turning over. I mean, there's an awful lot more that can be done with analog now that we have computers to work with it, and with recorded natural sounds. And I love your pig, singing pig, whatever. But tools are just turning over at an alarming rate. I mean, people they start learning to play an instrument when they were a young child and work with that same instrument throughout their entire life and achieve a level of mastery that, you know, we're like constantly, everything's upgraded, everything's turning over to a new thing, going from one program to another. So I wonder about that level of in-depth involvement with a tool. I mean, that was an astute remark of yours, Beethoven and Thelonious Monk using the same instrument. We don't even use the same instruments we did 5 years ago.
I discovered the other day when my computer crashed that I had 1,100 plugins that I sort of use, and I just think, you know, back when, you know, back a few years, they'd have been actually physical boxes, and I'm like, oh wait, I couldn't ever possibly have had 1,000, you know, 1,000 reverb units or 1,000 equalizers or compressors or whatever, all those bits sort of lying about, and the warehouse needed to house it all, and yet we just take it for granted that it's just a little bit of thing. I don't know, that's not a very good word.
Yeah, and there's this tendency to be constantly looking for the next thing to try too, as opposed to getting in deeper with technology you already have. And mastering it more completely.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have a final question here for today, and this continues on about, I guess, kind of the translation of music that you're writing. This is from Sarah Anglis via YouTube, and it's to Laurie first, but again, if anyone else wants to also answer this. Sarah's asking, have you found your own ways to integrate instructions for acoustic and electronic performers in written notation or other notation, so your scores can have a life with other performers?
I've done very little with that. It's odd, but I mean, I have done some. My ballet Waves was computer-generated electronics with live orchestral instruments, but by and large, they tend to be separate media to me. Just like I've never written songs. I mean, I write poems and I compose music, but I tend to, this is just the way my own personal mind works, you know, to keep different media kind of in their own cognitive channels, I guess.
Yeah, I think I've actually really struggled with this in terms of like, I seem to have written quite a few records that combine electronics with acoustic instruments, and when I'm playing it, it's fine, but then when you hand that electronic side over to somebody else, it's really, really hard to describe and notate it. And I was speaking to a friend who's an orchestrator recently, and she's come up with a way to notate that I think is really, really exciting, and I can't give it too much away, but it's the first time I've ever seen something that would be an instruction or a symbol that would allow other people to come in and play an electronic part or a synth part with an orchestra. And I think that's really, really exciting, because I've always ended up with scribbles everywhere, and if I lose that kind of draft scribble, that's it, it's gone.
Yeah, that's part of the problem I've had when I've tried, and I have tried a few times, is the lack of standardization in electronic instruments. With an analog synthesizer, you really literally can never get the same patch exactly back the same way twice. So you know what you're getting if you write for a traditional instrument. just don't always know what it's going to sound like if you try to score for a synthesizer player to be hired and plugged into the part later, you know, or something.
Yeah, it made me laugh in the film where it's just about them being alive and warm and sensual, and it's like they have their own thought process, and I really resonate with that idea and those words. I think it's hard sometimes to pin it down. It's like its own beast.
To some extent, all performers are going to bring their own individual personality to whatever kind of score for however traditional the instrument. But the range of variation with electronic instruments is much larger, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
When you have a part labeled synthesizer, it could be absolutely anything, sound like absolutely anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of synthesizers. And that's one of the great things that you can see in this film, that they're really amazing things.
Yeah, I think they're more to play than to score for.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've about wrapped up our conversation for tonight. So thank you to everybody. I'd like to thank Modern Films for making tonight's event possible. And really thank you to all of our guests. That's Lisa Rovner, Laurie Spiegel, Hannah Peel, and Matthew Herbert. And Sisters with Transistors is available now to stream on Curzon Online, on Curzon Home Cinema. So if you like the film and this event, please tell your friends. And coming up this Friday at 7 p.m. in the Curzon Living Room, journalist Hannah Flint will be in conversation with Aubrey Plaza and Lawrence Michael Levine about their new collaboration, The Black Bear. And I've been your host tonight. I'm Emily Bick. I'm the deputy editor of The Wire magazine. And you can read The Wire magazine at www.thewire.co.uk. And you can get our new issue with the composer Vicki Bennett, People Like Us, on the cover. It's available now. So anyway, thank you for watching, and goodbye.
Thank you.